Chapter 3. Making Decisions. It was just over an hour before Dana Scully showed up at his apartment. During that time he'd tried to concentrate on some bizarre TV programme on the Discovery Channel covering the subject of entomophagy. Basically, this involved folks deciding that bugs were just another type of nutritional meal. Pretty gross, although to be honest he'd seen far worse on past X-File cases. At least it switched off his mind for a short period. So much so that when he heard the knock at his door it almost made Mulder jump out of his skin. She breezed in and straight away headed for his kitchen, calling out, "Have you eaten anything?" whilst knowing full well he hadn't. Dana threw together a couple of sandwiches from the remaining contents in the fridge, which wasn't much, half a block of cheese, a bit of salad consisting mainly of limp lettuce, and a jar of pickles. She also found a carton of orange juice that had seen better days, so that went straight in the trash. At least he had one beverage remaining, so set about brewing them a couple of coffees. After a quiet thank you from him, they sat on the sofa together and ate in silence. All the while Scully showed great concern, but did not want to push him to talk if he didn't want to. At the same time she knew it was important, no, essential, that he eventually do so. She remembered him trying in vain to convince her to speak about her own abduction in the past, which she also had refused to accept, so she knew from experience how bottling up traumatic events was, in the end, not a wise thing to do for one's mental state of mind. She'd finally arranged a meeting with the psychiatrist, though it had been hard to deal with for the first few sessions. She glanced across at the TV, which was now displaying a man eating cockroaches, causing a brief flashback to a time when similar but robotic insects had infested a small rural town. She turned to look at her partner and gave him a sympathetic smile. In response he picked up the remote and pressed mute. Then, taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes briefly, before facing the woman he knew was the only person on this planet that he could fully confide in. "I'm afraid to talk about it, Scully," he murmured softly. She could see tears starting to well up and took hold of his hand. "I understand, Mulder, really I do." "There's a but in there," he said quietly, gently pulling away from her touch. She sighed heavily. "Mulder, did you ever stop to think why you carelessly went ahead and broke into that government building?" Before he could utter any kind of reply in his defence, she added, "Yes, I know you had help from the gunmen, and for once I'm grateful that you did." She didn't wait for a response. "But you must have known the shadow government or whoever—" "Whatever," he interjected, punctuating the word firmly. "Whatever, whoever," she said impatiently. "You must have known they would send soldiers to the facility. This was more careless and reckless than you normally are, and dangerous. It's almost as if—" She paused, wondering if she should continue. "Doggett set me up," he exclaimed harshly. "No, he didn't, Mulder," she stated. "And I also think you know that's not what happened." Noticing a look of surprise in those hazel eyes, she spoke deliberately but softly. "I just don't think you would have cared if those men gunned you down." "What?" he replied, shaking his head, refusing to look at her. "Mulder," this time when she reached out to hold his hand in hers, at least he didn't try to pull away. "What you must have experienced defies any rational explanation, possibly even goes beyond comprehension. I know, because I've undergone these tests by a group of men," he cut in sharply, emphasizing the word. She sighed again. "Oh, Mulder, it doesn't matter who by. What matters is that you've been through a terrible ordeal. You are emotionally and physically drained, and have reached a point where you're putting yourself in danger at the drop of a hat." She wasn't going to hold back now and continued harshly. "You just don't care." Realizing he wasn't even trying to deny what she'd said, she continued, her voice rising. "But I care, Mulder. I care." The concern she was feeling for him was now turning into annoyance. "You need to talk about this to someone, otherwise—" "Otherwise?" he echoed back at her. She squeezed his hand. "Otherwise," a brief pause. "This is going to fester and will eventually rip you apart," she warned him. "You mean I'll probably have some sort of psychotic break?" His words had come out so matter-of-fact that he even surprised himself. He squeezed his eyes shut as a memory slowly began to manifest in his shattered mind. "I've already been torn apart," he lamented, opening eyes which were now filled with tears. Scully frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Then she remembered the dreams she'd had of her partner suffering terrible tests aboard an alien ship, which caused her to shudder inside. Also the moment she'd seen Teresa Jose in the hospital, lying there unmoving in the bed, with those horrible disfiguring wounds all over her body, not to mention witnessing those same injuries on Mulder when she'd believed he was dead. Just the thought of him being tortured like that, it made her sick to her stomach even contemplating it. But the important thing here was that he had to tell her what really happened before it was too late. The last thing she wanted was him to end up in a psych ward again. Mulder. He heard the heartfelt plea as she spoke his name and felt her hand tremble slightly. Then he suddenly realised how selfish she was being. Here was a woman who would go to the ends of the earth for him, and had, but now he was refusing to let her in. Yet all she wanted was to help relieve the suffering he was going through. And yes, keeping such painful secrets buried deep in his mind would most likely lead to his return to Crazy Town, or worse. Let's face it, he wouldn't have given a shit if those soldiers had shot him in that Federal Statistics Centre in Virginia. Without even realising it at the time, he'd almost thrown his life away because he was at the stage where he no longer gave a flying fuck about himself anymore. No, it just wasn't fair of him to do this to her. Mulder took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Perhaps it was time to exorcise his demons after all. Please, Scully began, only more forceful. Don't let this destroy you. You are so much stronger than this. He snorted, giving a faint chuckle. I don't feel very strong right now, Scully. She started to protest, but he carried on. In the past, all I did was try to persuade those abductees to reveal their own experiences, never once considering how they must have felt. She gave him a puzzled look. But Mulder, she started to say. Let me finish, he told her. She could hear determination in his voice now, and knowing how stubborn he could be, just nodded in resignation. No, I mean, you're right, Scully, he admitted. She looked a little shocked, as she'd been half expecting him to bite her head off. Also, he didn't sound very convinced with what he'd just said. I am? Yes, but... he began firmly. Oh, here it comes, Scully thought to herself, ready for the onslaught she was about to receive. He bit his lip and exhaled slowly. But you know, I can't talk to any fucking counsellor about what happened to me. So then, who? She asked gently, pleased he hadn't aimed his anger in her direction. So, Mulder sniffed. I'll tell you, and only you. He looked straight into her eyes. But first you must promise me that you will never, ever repeat what I'm about to say to anyone. Noticing a look of sheer defiance mixed with anguish on his face, she replied, Okay, I promise. Cupping her hand under his chin, she added, You know you can trust me, Mulder. It's not a very pleasant story, he stammered, surrendering himself to the inevitable fact that he was now going to have to drudge up those nightmarish dreams once more. A tear fell down his cheek, and she gently wiped it away with her thumb. I know that, Scully replied softly, but I'm here, and I'm listening.